This is section 4.7 practice A. We're going to look at numbers 14 through 16. These are proofs. So what we're going to do is basically make a plan for this and then I'll write it out. We want to prove that two angles are congruent. Angle ABD, that's this one up here. We want to show that's congruent to angle CBD, that's this one up here. How can we do that? Well, you can't do it directly. What you're going to have to do first is show that these two triangles are congruent. Okay, this is a right triangle. So is this. So if you have two right triangles, that means these angles are congruent. You have congruent sides. You have congruent sides here by the reflexive property. These triangles are going to be congruent by side angle side. Then you can say that their corresponding parts are congruent by CP/CTC. So we'll write it out. Statements, reasons. Make sure I'm in the frame here. This is number 14. What's given? Segment AD is congruent to segment CD. Now, there's this that's given as well. If you want to put that on the same line, you can. If you want to put it on a separate line, you can. It's a totally different concept. It's telling you that segment BD is perpendicular to segment AC. That's what they're telling you. Now, you need to make some sense of that. What does that mean? If you have two perpendicular segments, that makes right angles. Angle ADC and angle CDB are right angles. How do you know that? That's what perpendicular means. Perpendicular gives you right angles. That's definition of perpendicular. Now, you need to know if you're going to use these right angles as right angles. So should I say that these triangles are right triangles? If I am, I'm using HL. Or am I using these right angles as congruent angles? That's the important part. We said in the beginning that we're going to call these congruent angles. That way we can use side angle side. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is say that angle ADC is congruent to angle CDB by the right angle congruence theorem. You got two right angles. They're congruent angles. We need to point out that this segment is congruent to itself. We said it in our plan. We need to put it in our proof. Segment BD is congruent to segment BD. How do I know that B goes with B? Well, look here. B goes with B. That's the reflexive property. Zoom out here. That's a little better. Now, those two triangles, we stated everything we needed to state about them. These two triangles are congruent triangles. So I'm going to say that triangle ADC is congruent to triangle CDB by side angle side. So then angle ABD is congruent to angle CBD by CP/CTC. That's a 7-step proof. We could have saved the step by combining our givens. Okay, but every single one of these steps you should be familiar with. We'll do the same thing for number 15. Here's two triangles. We want to show that they're congruent first. That way we can show their corresponding parts are congruent. Showing that this segment is congruent to this segment directly is going to be really tough to do. You need to show that these two triangles are congruent first. Okay, so let's just talk about it. I see two right triangles. That's fine. Maybe they're right triangles. Maybe we're just going to say that they're congruent angles. I see two pairs of parallel sides. I see one pair of parallel sides. That gives you a pair of congruent alternate interior angles. You also have a segment that's on both triangles. So we don't need to use right angles. We need to use the fact that these are congruent angles. Okay, so we're going to use angle side angle. Statements, reasons. What's given to us? Well, we're given that segment VW is parallel to segment UX. Also, they give you that these are right angles. Now, if you want to say that it's given that they're right angles, that's fine. You could also say that these segments are perpendicular. That's probably what they mean. But they don't say it, so angle VUW and angle XWU are right angles. That's given. Now, let's use this information. I'll use a little arrow here to help. What does this given mean? Well, I could have actually stated this up here as statement 2. That would make more sense. Give a statement after some given. It's easier to follow. Parallel lines gives you these congruent angles. So I'm going to say that angle XUW is congruent to angle VWU. That's the alternate interior angle theorem. That's a pair of congruent angles. That's our first pair. So I'll put a little star there because we got one pair of congruent angles, one pair of congruent parts. This information, the fact that these two angles are right angles, that gives you another pair of congruent angles. So angle VUW is congruent to angle XWU. That's the right angle congruence theorem. If you've got two right angles, they're congruent to each other. There's another pair of congruent parts. So now we're up to 2. Here's our third pair right here. That segment UW is congruent to itself. Just watch the order, please. UW is going to go with WU. If you're not sure, look. U goes with W. That's your reflexive property. That's your third pair of congruent parts. These triangles are congruent by angle side angle. So triangle VUW is congruent to triangle XWU by angle side angle. How do you know these parts are congruent then? Well, if the triangles are congruent, the parts are congruent too by CPCTC. That's another 7-step proof. I can see why you would struggle with all of the steps at once, but I think if you just look at each step one at a time, it's not that complicated. Putting them together is, though. I understand that. Okay, we'll do one more on this video. Better zoom in here so you can see this a little better. Okay, so you're going to position yourself halfway between two buildings of equal height by moving to a position where the congruent angles formed between the horizontal and your line of sight to the top of each building. Verify this by completing the 3-step proof below. So what they're saying is these angles are the same. These buildings stand at right angles. Notice how also they're telling you that the buildings have the same height. Okay, so look at the two triangles. They're congruent by angle, angle, side. You don't need right triangles, you need congruent angles. Okay, so we have all this information because it's given. We know the triangles are congruent by angle, angle, side. That means their corresponding parts are congruent by CPCTC.